Hey, everybody. It is good to have all of us together. It is the fourth Wednesday of March, and we get to be here for our second community conversation, which is really exciting and wonderful. And it's lovely to have all of you here with us. I'm just checking the waiting room, making sure nobody's sitting in there waiting for us. But we're really excited about this particular conversation. I think we're going to be excited about all of them, to be quite frank with you. We have some amazing people. I'm trying to pretend like, but we have some really amazing special guests with us. And we are here this evening to talk about our second principle. As all of you probably know, one of the very first things, if not the very first thing, that the BLUU Organizing Collective did was to develop these incredible 7 principles for Black lives. And our hope and purpose throughout our time this year is to really dive deep into these principles and to think more clearly about how we show up in our Unitarian Universalism as Black folks with our particular stories and our lives in this country and in the world. And so what I thought I might do to get us started is just to give you a little overview about how we're going to move through the conversation tonight. And also want to share a little bit. I'm going to read the second principle and share a little bit about our reading that I know some of us had an opportunity to take a look at. But that is in the event page. So if you didn't get a chance to read it, the PDF for the reading is there. So please don't hesitate to go back and look at it. With that, why don't I just say a little bit about our outline for the night. So what we're going to do, Takia is going to, once I'm done, Takia is going to introduce our special guests, give our special guests an opportunity to share about the second principle. We're going to ask some particular questions of them and get them talking, and we'll have an opportunity to really hear them. Don't hesitate to, at the last conversation, some people brought pen and paper and we're taking notes. So do what feels good to you, what feels right. Just listen if you need to, take some notes if you need to. And then once they've had an opportunity to share for a little while, we're going to open the conversation up to folks. You may have questions, particular things may have come up for you while you were listening to the special guest. Don't hesitate to ask or about those things or share those things in this space. We are recording this conversation. We'll record the entire conversation, but then edit down specifically to the special guest portion of the conversation, and that will get shared more broadly, so other folks have an opportunity to hear that and see that. So that's what we're going to do tonight. Are folks excited? Yeah. All right. Let's do it. So I'm going to start by reading our second principle. The second principle is that love and self-love is practiced in every element of all we do. And I'll just read what it says about that principle. Love and self-love must be drivers of all our work and indicators of our success. Without this principle and without healing, we will harm each other and undermine our movement. The movement for Black lives seeks to build a society where Black people thrive instead of survive. We seek justice for those we have lost to police violence. We seek equity in housing, education, and healthcare. We seek compassion from our fellow UUs for the struggle we are called to be a part of. So deeply grateful for that particular principle. I've needed to go back to it many times. So I'm glad we're focusing on it tonight. Hey, Matthew, good to see you. As we were talking about what reading we might focus on tonight, because we're inviting folks to read something just to help, bring you more deeply into the conversation, came across this book, Salvation by People in Love, by Bell Hooks. And she has an entire chapter where she is talking about self-love and the struggle of that, right? And so we thought it might be a good idea for folks to read that chapter. I'm just going to read one little piece here and then turn it over to you, Takia. It says, the practice of self-love is difficult for everyone in a society that is more concerned with profit than well-being. But it is even more difficult for Black folks, as we must constantly resist the negative perceptions of Blackness we are encouraged to embrace by the dominant culture. I think that is certainly a relevant statement for us as Black UUs, some of whom are in brick and mortar congregations, some of whom are in other institutions within Unitarian Universalism. And so we're excited to dive deep into this conversation with the folks who are gathered. So welcome, everyone. Takia?
Again, thank you so much for being here. I'm Takia Nur Amin, Content Director for BLUU, and I am really excited about the opportunity we have tonight to really talk about love and self-love and how those ideas are essential to a people's theology and emerging Black Unitarian Universalist theology. I am blessed to be able to introduce our special guest this evening. When I introduce you, please unmute yourself and just give a shout, say hello to the people. I am pleased and proud to welcome the Reverend Kim Hampton. Kim is a candidate for the ministry working towards dual fellowship with the Disciples of Christ and the UUA. She's also past president of the UU Christian Fellowship and a longtime ardent supporter of BLUU. We thank her so much. Say hey to the people, Reverend Kim.
Hey, y'all.
Yay.
Hey.
We have the Reverend Marcus Fogliano with us, who is project manager for the Commission on Institutional Change, and another member of our BLUU family who's been with us since the beginning.
It's nice to see everyone. Glad to be here with you. I just want to clarify that I am with the Commission on Institutional Change, but I do not speak for them. So everything that I share here is coming from me.
Which is exactly where we wanted to come from. So excited for our guests to show up as their full selves this evening. And lastly, we have Lena K. Gardner. Lena, don't forget the K, Gardner, founding executive director of Black Lives of Unitarian Universalism and one of my favorite people.
Hey, y'all. I'm excited for tonight's discussion.
Yeah. Okay, so what we're going to do now is transition into hearing from our special guests. So for everyone else in the room, just get comfortable. If you're taking notes, that's fine. If you just want to kind of relax, let what you hear wash over you. This is a community conversation. And so we encourage you to get comfortable and just be in community with us. Again, to underscore Reverend Michael's point from the introduction, we are recording the community conversation so that it will be saved and posted on BLUU's YouTube channel in the future if you'd like to access it for reference. But the part of the conversation when we segue into hearing questions from those of us who are assembled, we will be sure to edit that out so as to protect your anonymity. So don't worry about not being able to ask questions or speak up. We'll make sure that that part of the conversation isn't shared beyond what's happening in the room here this evening. So we're going to hear from our guests really on two questions, and I'd like us to start with this one first. Reverend Kim, I'm coming to you first. When we think about that second principle that Michael shared with us, and also, you know, in light of what Hooks is talking about in salvation, what is it about the second principle, this idea that love and self-love has to be center, essential, critical to what we do? What feels real and relevant with the respect to that principle in your life?
Oh, wow. I've been, for research for the book, I've been reading, as Takia knows, I've been reading Song of Songs, and which is all about love in whichever way you want to talk about love, whether you're talking about romantic or broader love. And because it's so seldom, that book is so seldom talked about in any religious circle, it's been interesting trying to find stuff about it that is relevant to our circumstances here in America at this point in America, which seems like it's on the downward slide. But what really strikes me is that if we talk about love, you can't talk about love without talking about beauty and joy. There's absolutely no way to do it. And so to me, love and self-love is what makes you feel beautiful and joyful. So what brings you joy? What makes you feel beautiful? What makes the world seem beautiful to you? That's what love is. Aside from the fact that justice is what love looks like in public, which is a whole different sphere or a discussion, even though I know that's coming up in this one too. But just the idea that all these things work together. All things work for the good, as you know, those of us who were brought up evangelical are taught. And so if you have love without beauty, it's anemic. If you have love without joy, it's not really love. Because essentially it's going to express itself. And love that's not joyful, I don't know if I want to see that. That just, yeah, no. And so that's where I go when I hear that question and what the principle means to me, and research always.
That's really beautiful. Thank you so much. Reverend Marcus, I'm coming to you. What do you think? We're still on this question about what feels real and relevant with respect to the second principle in your life.
So for me, the second principle of Black lives is very significant in that our 7 principles of Unitarian Universalism don't make reference to love. And I think that is something that, while our sources call us to answer the love of God with love for one another and all that are in our community, that's not necessarily reflected in our 7 principles of Unitarian Universalism. I deeply connect with 2 Corinthians, beginning of 6, when it says to accept what my tradition, I am an ordained Jehovah's Witness, calls undeserved kindness, or is referenced to as grace. So to not miss that purpose of the undeserved kindness of God. And that purpose is that we accept that salvation from God, and we share that love that we receive with those that are within the community and the broader community as well. So I see in love, in the second principle of Black lives, that representation of bringing in the love of God and sharing it with others. That's where it resonates with me.
That's really helpful. You know, I don't know if I remembered in the forefront of my consciousness coming into this conversation that love is not explicitly mentioned in our Unitarian Universalist principles. I'm sure I knew that somewhere in my studies, but I really appreciate you for amplifying that in the conversation. Lena K., we're coming to you. Talk to us about where these notions of love and self-love sit within your life.
Yeah, I think this is a really powerful question. When we were coming up with the principles, part of, I think, what we were struggling with and seeing throughout the whole movement for Black lives is, was a tension between sort of respectability and who's worthy of mourning and who's worthy of the, fighting for justice for them and who's not. And I think right along there, up there with what Reverend Kim named around beauty and joy, I think love is also about acceptance. And to me, that's related to people's inherent dignity. And how can you accept people for who they are and where they are and really still love them? And that's different than accepting all kinds of behavior, right? That may be destructive, that Bell Hooks talks about in the book, right? That's a different thing. And so I think it's also related, to what Reverend Marcus was saying around, so what does love mean? How do we understand that? How do we think about that? And I think, recently when we put out our vision statement, part of what we felt like we needed to do was talk about what does love mean a little bit more and unpack that. And, we came up with words like life-changing, inclusive, relational, it's unconditional. And so I think for me, personally and collectively, I'm consistently asking myself, how do I understand love to show up in this instance, in this circumstance? And I think it's particularly, that question gets particularly influenced by shame, right? And this is what Bell Hooks is exploring in this chapter. And it's, I don't think there are any easy answers. And I also think one of the things she points to is how in some ways we felt like we've had to sort of morph from dealing with the shame of racism into how do we individually deal with it. And that's done us a disservice. So I really feel like one of the things that we really are trying to do with BLUU and have done is how do we turn to each other and sort of let go of some of the shame and love each other in whatever is happening in whatever moment. And I certainly have had so many instances where I feel like BLUU family has really held and shown me what it means to love in a new way, both, collectively and myself, because we believe so deeply in the principle and asking the questions instead of just rushing to sort of a visceral or shallow understanding of what it means to love.
Lena, thank you for that. I'm going to stay with you when I come back to our second question. It just makes me think about how in my life so many times I have been sort of openly ridiculed for loving parts of myself or parts of my culture as a Black person, like openly ridiculed because how dare you be proud of that? Why would you be proud of coming from those people? Why would you be proud of that history? Why would you be proud of coming from that place or looking that way? And how being in communities that affirm us and lift us up is so essential when we're hearing counter messages, right? That maybe tell us what we love and what we're proud of are shameful, ugly, dirty, backwards things that we should somehow give up. Being in community that affirms you in that expansive understanding of love seems really important. So staying with that, Lena, what do you think in terms of how the principle guides us in living out a Black Unitarian Universalism or Unitarian Universalism that really centers Blackness?
Well, I think, Reverend Marcus kind of touched on this a little bit. It's not in the broader Unitarian Universalism construct, right? At least not explicitly about love. And of course, we have side with love as a whole separate, and beautiful thing. But I think that we just, from the very beginning, knew and understood love as a healing balm and also as a catalyst for action, as both of those things. And so I think when we think about a particular expression from a Black political consciousness or a Black consciousness of Unitarian Universalism, it's really going to hone in on those two pieces that I don't see really articulated in the same way in other non-Black UU spaces. When I go to different events here at my own church, you don't really hear it talked about as, I will say this, when I first started coming, I didn't hear it talked about as much. I think there is some things starting to shift, but I still do think there's something I've heard you talk about, Dr. Takia, is around the communalism of Blackness, and that historically, we have survived and thrive by being together. And Bell Hooks talks about it in this chapter about segregation. And yes, it was degrading and dehumanizing. And in our spaces, we could love each other and really see each other as human. And so when those spaces dissolve and we're or gone, suddenly all of our reflections are from the white folks. And that does a particular thing to your consciousness. So when we think about articulating a Black Unitarian Universalism, it has to center that love as a healing balm. It has to center that love as a catalyst to keep fighting for justice, to keep fighting for our people. It has to do both of those things. And I think it's also not to be confused with passiveness or with sort of a superficial niceness. I think sometimes those things get conflated or confused. And I think the other thing that particularly a Black expression of Unitarian Universalism through love calls for transformation of self. It kind of calls for you to humble yourself and start to see some things about yourself that might be uncomfortable and try to start working on those, but to work on those through a lens of we're in this together, not a lens of you're incredibly shameful. And I think for me, experiencing that shift, other organizing spaces I had come from were very shaming about my areas of growth and transformation. And that just shut me down. It didn't make me want to do the hard work of digging deeper and trying to keep working to transform myself, right? And so I think those are some particularities of Black expressions of Unitarian Universalism and really honing in on love that I feel like really stand out to me.
That's really rich, Lena. What it makes me think about too is, you're really lifting up this notion of self-compassion, that yes, we have growing edges. Yes, we all have things that we're working on. But that doesn't mean we need to beat ourselves up or excoriate ourselves in the name of transformation, but also that leaning into transformation requires faith. You don't know necessarily how you're going to be changed, but showing up lovingly and being willing to walk into change is definitely a distinct kind of theological perspective. And also, I think there's something about a Black Unitarian Universalism that is deeply relational. As you said, it's like our religion is, our faith is, our praxis is relational and communal. It's not confessional. In some ways, you confess what you want. You can confess a belief in what prophets or God or deities or energies that's personal. But your faith is going to be the thing that we're understanding as your faith is that which shows up in our relationship to each other, right? That what happens when you and I interact with each other is the proof of what we believe, or the evidence of our tradition, truly a people's kind of theology. Reverend Kim, do you have thoughts about that you might share?
Well, I do, because the passivity of love in white UU spaces is, okay, I won't even come up with the word for it. It just is. And it's shallow, and you can see it, that it's shallow, and that partly because it doesn't hold people to the communities that they join originally. And so a real ethic of love is highly relational, and it's highly accountable, because relationships only work if we can hold each other accountable. So Lena said it better than I could. It's active, but so it's both a verb and an adverb. And too often with our non-melanated friends, love is a noun. And understanding that love actually could fit in all categories of language is something that I think Black UUism has that our non-melanated friends don't. Because it is, I mean, love is active. Love is always active. Because if it's not active, it's stale. And it's not going to be love for long if it's not active. So it's the verb, it's the adjective, it can describe things. It's the adverb, it can be attached to lovingly or lovely or whatever. So that the whole idea of relationship, Baldwin says the only people who had true Christianity were the slaves. And I agree with him on that, but I think it's not just Christianity. I think it's people who don't, if you look at the story of most people who have had to live in diaspora, the way that they survive is by loving communally. That's the only way they can survive. I mean, it is the whole entirety of the Jewish story. Is the only way Jews survive is by staying in community. Otherwise, they would have long been gone from the earth. But the reason that they've survived, what are we at, 6,000 now, almost 6,000 years? The reason they've got 6,000 years of history is because in diaspora, they learned resilience. They learned how to do this when they didn't have that central focus. They didn't have Jerusalem. And so for Africans in diaspora, when you don't know which part of Africa your family actually comes from, you can only do this if you are in relationship or in community with other people who understand your plight. So that's what I have to add.
And Reverend Kim, it reminds me of, listening to that and hearkening back to something that Lena said too, this kind of distinction between nice and kind, right? That nice is like the appearance of love and care, where kindness is like embedded in the deep practice of love and care. That a Black Unitarian Universalism is less concerned with the appearance of things than the lived presence of those things as a kind of theological imperative. Yeah, y'all are smart. Be my friends forever. Yay. Reverend Marcus, coming to you on this question, still sticking with this notion of how does the second principle guide us in living out a Unitarian Universalism that centers Blackness?
Absolutely. So I think I'm going to stick with this conversation about the communal aspect of the Black community. To just for clarification, while love is not found in our seven principles, it is found in our sources, but both prophetic words and deeds, and understanding the love of God and how that calls us to love one another in a communal way. I think within Black community, we have no delusion that institutions aren't always going to be supportive of us, and usually are out to get us anyway. So I think within Black UU culture, the drive to forget our heritage is not necessarily there. We don't throw away the whole scriptures because of something that some institution did to us, because institutions have been doing that to us all along. I think that if we the congregational polity that Unitarian Universalism claims to be a part of calls us to, in the way that we interact with each other, show up in a way that Jesus would have shown up. And I think that within the book of John, chapter 1, I think it is, it says that Jesus embodied undeserved kindness and grace, and that should be embodied in how we see ourselves, that undeserved kindness and grace, and how we interact with one another, and that includes that accountability aspect of congregational polity. I think that Black UUs aren't throwing away that understanding of congregational polity. So I think that's kind of where I'm sitting in that communal aspect of Black UU spaces, is not letting go of that history of both universalism and how God's love is unconditional, and how congregational polity and how we hold each other accountable and in community, it's there.
What's beautiful about that is, this question of, is there a love ethic that grounds Unitarian Universalism? It seems like from the conversation that we're having so far with our guests, there certainly seems to be a love ethic that grounds a Black Unitarian Universalism unequivocally, that is grounded in both an embrace of that's grounded in an equal embrace of our principles and our sources, not our principles or our sources, right? That we don't eschew the wisdom traditions that held our ancestors, whether they are earth-based religious practices, traditional practices from the continent, practices that emerge in diaspora like Santeria or Hoodoo, or the traditional Abrahamic faith traditions. We embrace the wisdom and truth of those traditions that point us towards love and justice, as a part of our faith, not principles or sources, but principles and sources. I see you, Reverend Marcus. You have a follow-up thought?
Yeah, so I just want to clarify. I'm not saying that only our Christian heritage or our Abrahamic heritage calls us to love, because we have also in our sources that it's the prophetic words and deeds of people call us into love as well. And that comes from prophetic words and deeds from all traditions. So I think that within our heritage as Unitarian Universalists, that Christian component is definitely attached to it. The Abrahamic faith component is attached to it, but how we understand and interpret and has been communicated from other viewpoints, from other traditions, has come from the prophetic individuals within our community.
That's really helpful too, because it reminds us that we can find prophetic words in bell hooks. We can find prophetic words in the truth of each other, right? That ours is a living tradition, right? If you go to most UU congregations, you look on the cover of the hymnal, it says singing the living tradition, right? So what does it mean for us to kind of be working through and embodying a Black Unitarian Universalism as a living tradition? I think there's something to be said for every generation reinterpreting the tradition that they've been given. And it seems that is what we are doing tonight and in conversation with each other and in this moment.
I just want to just say there aren't enough words. There aren't adequate words for my gratitude for this conversation, and for this time that we've spent together, and for, in particular, our special guests, Marcus and Kim and Lena, and to everyone who came in tonight. I think we got a whole lot out of this conversation. We lifted up love and self-love as beauty and joy. We also highlighted love as a healing balm and as a catalyst for movement and for change. I particularly appreciated the conversation around grace, and the shifting of that language from undeserved to unearned, right? That we are all worthy of love and self-love, and that ultimately the ways that we get to the place and to the point where we can experience that love and self-love is in community. It's with one another. It's how we are able to open up ourselves to what delights us. And it's I really appreciated this notion that we can truly bask in all of the things that make us who we are and love all of that, and that we're not far from it, right? That this is part of our history as Black people, right? That communalism of Blackness is real. We have been figuring out how to take care of ourselves and love on ourselves and love one another in critical moments when no one else was doing it. And we can get back there, and we are getting back there. We're doing it right here, right now. And that is a deep joy that I am grateful for. And I hope others are too. It seems like it. And of course, the big takeaway is apparently there are going to be some Black camping trips that we're going to talk about. I am all the way down for that. So is there anything else, Takia, that you want to lift up before we close out tonight?
Yeah, I just want to thank everybody again for making some time to be with us this evening. We know that you could have been elsewhere, and yet you chose to be in community with us. Everyone's presence always makes these experiences even richer. Just want to remind people that next month, Wednesday, April 24th, 7:30, we will be talking about principle number 3. Spiritual growth is directly tied to our ability to embrace our whole selves. Principle number 3, spiritual growth is directly tied to our ability to embrace our whole selves. And in that conversation, we're really talking about, so what is spiritual growth in Unitarian Universalism? In a tradition that in some ways has been marked by the absence of ritual and rites of passage in particular kinds of ways, how is spiritual growth marked or delineated? And also, how do we foster spiritual growth or maturity amongst ourselves as Black Unitarian Universalists? We're very York from the UUA, Reverend Natalie Fenimore, Aisha Hauser, both Aisha and Jessica and Reverend Natalie too are all longtime religious educators and leaders in lifespan faith development in this faith. In preparation for that, we ask that you go on the UUA's website, www.uua.org/RE, to look at the information that's there on lifespan faith development. For a lot of people who might not even know Unitarian Universalism, they know that our congregations generally have a positive reputation around the religious education that we do with young people. So what is lifespan faith development? When Black Unitarian Universalists, after the 2017 convening, it was very clear that our people at least want deep study around theological ideas, around Black history, and also around the sources of our faith. That there's a real desire to continue learning, growing, exploring, and having deeper literacy and engagement with those things. So we'll be talking about this notion of spiritual growth in Unitarian Universalism. That's Wednesday, April 24th at 7:30 p.m. Just want to remind folks too that part of the reason why we are having these community conversations is because we decided to spend this year, we're sort of calling it our BLUU theology year, of really engaging this question of what is a UU theology? What is a Black Unitarian Universalist here in 2019? And we're having these community conversations leading up to the Harper Jordan Memorial Symposium, which will be October 30th through November 2nd. That is the Harper Jordan Memorial Symposium proclaiming a Black UU theology in St. Paul, Minnesota. We are very, very excited. Please go to the BLUU website. All the information for registration is there. Your registration includes the plenaries, the worships, the fireside chat, several of the meals. We do have sliding scale and other support available. So if you have not already signed up and locked in a spot for symposium, please go ahead and submit that registration. We really do want to see you with us. It'll be my first trip to Minnesota, so that's all the more reason to come. Just come see, we can hang out and all that good stuff. But we're very excited about having an entire symposium to really dig deep into both the historical roots and contemporary manifestations of Black UU theology. You know, our forebears have contributed to Unitarianism, Universalism, and Unitarian Universalism. We have a rich heritage, and the symposium will give us a great opportunity to do that. Want to come quickly to all of our guests. Lena, we see you rolling out. Go ahead and say goodbye to the people.
Bye, y'all. Thank you so much. This was a blessing this evening, and I just deep gratitude for this space. Thank you.
Thank you for being here, Lena.
Reverend Kim, come on, say goodbye to the people.
Oh wow, I'm so glad all of you all came and that you could hear me, number one. So it's great to see people. It's great to see faces. It's great to see Black faces. It's always good to be together.
Reverend Marcus, bring it home.
It is good to be with all of you. Know that you are loved by this community, that you are loved by the divine, and find that love within yourself.
And everybody go ahead, unmute yourself and say good night. Good night.
Thank you.
Good night.
You are wearing that shirt.
Good night, everybody.
Good night, everyone.
So good to
I
see
ain't going
everyone.
camping with
So
y'all.
good to see you. We love you.
Good
I don't camp. I
Y'all take
appreciate that
care.
we can camp, but I'm not going to.
We love y'all.
I'm going to stop the recording now.